Welcome back to the podcast history of our world. Chapter 23, King David. This episode marks the first time in our study of the Israelites that we can start approximating historical dates. David's reign as king of Israel lasts from about 1000 to 970 BC. Before you ask it, it's inconclusive whether he really existed, just like everyone so far. I do find it odd that so much detail went into writing about a supposedly fictional king, but aside from my personal hunch, there is some archaeological evidence to consider here. Two artifacts are of particular interest here, the first being the Mesha stele, a 9th century Moabite account detailing their rebellion from Israelite rule. Their descriptions correlate directly to how the second book of Kings describes things, which is pretty neat. Except of greater interest to historians, however, is a line on the stele making reference to the House of David. Now, since I just mentioned David dies circa 970 BC, it's not talking about him the person, but rather his dynasty, or his capital city in Jerusalem. But maybe you need more convincing. Alright, the other artifact in question is the Tel Dan stele, again dated to the 9th century. Written in Aramaic, it describes how King Hazael of Damascus took revenge on an unnamed king of Israel for previous invasions launched against his father. Again of note is how he describes ruining the towns of the House of David. Both artifacts have had their authenticity checked out, no fraudulent stuff here like the James ossuary. Instead, consider the value of these two pieces. If a line of kings ruled Israel descending from David, does that mean Saul was real? And Samuel? Or even the Hebrew Hulk himself, Samson? I wonder. Well, skeptic or not, we continue with David having taken over the kingship following the murder of his rival Ishbaal. Just so we're all on the same page with the geography, right now David is king of the unified kingdom of Israel and Judah, or just Kingdom of Israel for short. Judah's in the south, Israel's in the north. Israel supported the house of Saul during the Civil War, while the Judeans backed the house of David. There's a lot of tension here, and that means as a post-Civil War leader, David has his work cut out for him. Yahweh may have blessed his rule, but half the people sure haven't, and of course he's still surrounded by enemies on all sides. But hey, no problem. David practically wrote the handbook on how to be a new king, with 6 easy-to-follow steps, perfect for the modern monarch on the go. Step 1. Crush the opposition. Well, that's already done. Added bonus, he didn't dirty his hands getting rid of Ishbaal. Step 2. Choose a new capital city. David's currently based in Hebron, the capital of Judah. Staying here would be a constant and provocative reminder of southern dominance. The wounds from the Civil War will heal faster if a new location is picked. David settles on the walled city of Jebus, currently occupied by the Jebusites, Canaanites who had never been conquered by the Hebrews. Well, that's the biblical name of the city at least. The Akkadians called it Urushalim, the Hebrews called it Yerushalayim, and later the Arabs will call it Al-Quds. But we know it as Jerusalem. Those solid walls are real nice, although there's more value in its strategic location. The city is situated right between the Israelite and Judean states, making it an ideal neutral start to a unified country. Smart move. Thomas Jefferson had the same idea selecting Washington, D.C. as America's capital. Neither in the South or the North, it's a happy medium. Well, it's a great idea, but it's not like the Jebusites are going to just hand it over to him, and David wasn't taking Jerusalem through the front doors. The stone walls will repel any invaders, and besieging the city wasn't going to work either. That's because another key feature of Jerusalem is that it's built atop an ancient water spring. Pretty handy in a region that receives an average rainfall of about 20 inches a year. The Jebusites had even dug out tunnels to effectively manage their water supplies, which, while a brilliant idea, was one that ended up proving their downfall. David sends his right-hand man Joab to lead a special ops force through those tunnels and up into the city. Then they surprise the defenders, open the gates, let David's men in, kill the soldiers, but take mercy on the civilians. Oh, they're getting kicked out, but in a decidedly non-Joshua way, they get to live. Jerusalem was David's to command, although he wouldn't get to enjoy it quite yet, because the Philistines were once again on the move. Man, are we sick of these guys yet? They capture David's hometown of Bethlehem as a way to force the new king's hand, like they did with Saul, and instantly regret their decision. David was a far superior military leader, and his time with the mighty men and as a Philistine mercenary taught him much. His armies humble the Philistines so badly that they never bother him again. And that calls for a celebration. A publicity tour through his realm should suffice, and people line the streets just to catch a glimpse of their awesome celebrity king. Additionally, they're also out to witness the star attraction of his parade, the Ark of the Covenant. So David was moving it to Jerusalem to properly honor it, where everyone could reflect on how cool it is. And Jerusalem is where his tour ends, where dancers, musicians, and trumpeters herald his arrival with a triumphant fanfare. There's so much excitement in the air that it's hard not to get swept up in it all. David certainly can't resist, and instead of behaving like some stuffy emperor on his high horse, he strips down to his loincloth and boogies down half naked in the streets. Finally, once the fiesta was over, he holds a sacrifice to Yahweh and distributes food and bread to his citizens. All in all, a great day. Time to go home to the missus and relax. Well, she was waiting for him, Michal, daughter of Saul, and was none too happy about his buffoonery in the streets. How the king of Israel has honored himself today, shamelessly disrobing in the sight of the slave girls like some fool. She's pretty angry. David's gonna have to choose his words carefully here. Hey, my dance was for the Lord, who chose me over your father to rule Israel, and if I want to disrobe in front of some slave girls, then I will. Expertly said, and from that day on, he never touched Michal again. Why the sudden case of jerkitis? Telling your wife that God abandoned her dead father is pretty cold, but then to storm off like a baby? Oh, David, we thought you were better than this. Still, it's not like he can't go off to his concubines. This is the ancient world after all. Kings do this stuff regardless of their culture. And aside from this moment of marital strife, David continues to follow the new king handbook. And step 3 is management. The kingdom needs to move away from its tribal past and embrace a new order. The state is divided into 12 districts, each one paying taxes directly to Jerusalem. Having the ark within the city brought further legitimacy to this new capital, making Jerusalem a holy destination. This in turn meant encouraging pilgrimages to the city during holidays like Passover and Sukkot, which is good for the spirit, but even better for the coffers. All those pilgrims need inns, shops, food. We're talking about a nice economic boost here. And speaking of the economy, step 4, secure trading partners. Wiping out the Canaanites isn't sound fiscal policy. To the north, in what is now Lebanon, lies the port city of Tyre, ruled by King Hiram. The Tyrians are Canaanites, but they, along with cities like Byblos and Sidon, are more commonly called Phoenicia, and formed a profitable relationship with Israel. Hiram is especially famous for aiding David's heir in the construction of massive building projects in Jerusalem, which we'll cover in the next episode. Step 5 is a two-parter. Seek out military allies and conquer your foes. While David definitely has economic support, that's where the relationship stops. Israel is still pretty much at war with just about everybody, so while some are happy to take their money, no one's actually going to lift a finger to help. Well, if you can't join them, beat them. David keeps his army busy conquering neighboring tribes like the Moabites, Edomites, and Ammonites. Conquering, but not destroying. David's policy is to turn defeated Canaanite kingdoms into vassal states. They get to live, and Israel gets a steady stream of income. It's not how Samuel would have done things, but he's not around to complain, is he? Finally secure at home and abroad, David can move to the final chapter of becoming a new king. Step 6. Make sure you have kids. In addition to his concubines, David was also an unabashed fan of polygamy, having multiple wives. Doing so greatly increases the chances of having a viable heir, and if that doesn't work, there's plenty of backup heirs too. Hey, it worked for Egypt when their gene pool hadn't been cleaned out in a while. Now, the Old Testament lists 8 named wives of David, but suggests that there were probably more, and even bastard children with concubines as well. Hey, it's good to be the king. Although one might be misled that David was doing all of this to ensure his dynasty continued and the kingdom was stable. Well, make no mistake, David loved the ladies, with one lady more than all. The story goes that on a particular night, David's on the palace roof surveying his city when he spies a gorgeous woman taking a bath in full view of her window. Overwhelmed by her beauty, he orders his servants to find out who she is and to bring her to him at once. They in turn hesitate because they already know who she is. She's Bathsheba, wife to Uriah the Hittite, one of David's mighty men off fighting the Canaanites. Yeah, but so what? He's the king, and his servants dutifully bring her to the palace, whereupon the two, know each other. Fast forward a little bit, and guess what? She's pregnant. Now, he might be the king, but what he just did is adultery, as in, he broke commandment number 7. The palace aides and priests knew about this little indiscretion, and David was feeling judging eyes everywhere. How to resolve this? Well, fortunately, Uriah was still away and didn't know anything. So David quickly pens a letter to Joab, now commander of the Israelite forces, and this is how it reads. Set Uriah on the front lines where the fighting is fiercest, and withdraw from him, so that he may be struck down and die. Joab did as commanded, and moved Uriah the cuckold up front where he's slain in battle. Hooray! It isn't adultery if he's dead, right? Bathsheba enters into the proper mourning period for her husband, for public appearance of course, and once the time is passed, David quickly marries her. She gives birth to their love baby, but the child is born sickly and dies shortly after. Punishment from God, it's said, for their sinful ways. Nevertheless, David and Bathsheba try again, and this time she gives birth to a strong and healthy boy whom they named Solomon. He would have no full siblings, but rather a whole host of half-brothers and half-sisters, all living within the palace walls, ready to welcome him into the big Davidic family. If anyone harbored ill will against Solomon for the faults of his parents, it was kept quiet. Either out of respect, or because he was so way down on the inheritance list, it didn't really matter. After all, the current heir to the throne was David's first and favored son, Amnon, the apple of his eye. The boy's pampered life never let him stray too far from the safety of Jerusalem, an enviable upbringing. Yet despite his fortunate status, Amnon had a dark side, and his depravity set off events that almost unraveled David's kingdom. Amnon was dangerously obsessed with his half-sister Tamar, and even though he had been warned against these thoughts, finally tricks her into letting him into her room, where he rapes her. Traumatized and afraid, Tamar seeks out her full brother Absalom and tells him what happened. Absalom was David's third son and very popular with the people. Charismatic, handsome, and generous, he's the very definition of a true noble. He takes in Tamar's news with a surprising amount of calm and restraint, his response being that she should be patient and not to dwell on the matter. That's the least comforting thing he could have said, but Absalom was confident that once David found out about this, justice would be served. Of course, David finds out and is furious at Amnon. But how could he stay mad at his favorite son, huh? Well, just don't do it again and run along now. So Amnon is not punished for this despicable act, and if you're feeling angry, then imagine what Absalom was feeling. Having learned of his dad's response, he dropped the cool act and boiled over with rage. There is no way this degenerate is going to escape justice. Absalom gathers up his friends and invites Amnon over to a dinner feast, getting him nice and drunk until at the right moment, everyone starts stabbing Amnon in the gut. Good. Although unbeknownst to Absalom, a servant had seen the murder and rushed off to David to tell him what happened. David's reaction was that he ripped his clothes in anguish and collapsed on the ground while all his servants stood by with their own clothes torn. That made Absalom fear for his own safety, and he fled Jerusalem to stay at his grandfather's place for 3 years before David missed him enough to call him home. Love the sinner, not the sin and all, although he couldn't bear to look at Absalom anymore. For 2 years, Absalom was told to avoid contact with his father, so to keep busy during this time, he began to tour the surrounding regions with a personal guard of about 50 men. Surprisingly, everywhere he went, he heard the same story from the people. David was failing them as king, and no one would hear their complaints. They begged Absalom for help, but all he could give in response was, "If only I were judge in the land, then everyone could bring their cases to me, and I would give them justice." The word spread. People now ran out not to complain to him, but to rejoice and celebrate his arrival. This happened wherever he went, and finally at the old capital of Hebron, in a bit of history repeating itself, the people proclaimed him King of Israel, as they once did to his father. David found out pretty fast and chose to abandon Jerusalem. Maybe he wanted to prevent any harm that a siege would bring, or maybe it's because he just wanted to avoid fighting his son. Either way, David leaves, accompanied by his mighty men and a crack force of 600 Philistine warriors. Boy, the tables certainly have turned, huh? They were better fighters than anything Absalom could muster, if that's what his son was truly planning. Although military strength wasn't going to be the deciding factor here, a spy had been planted within Absalom's camp and was able to pass on false information, saying that if they traveled through the forest of Ephraim, Absalom could launch a sneak attack on David's army. He took the bait. David's army was ready and waiting, easily scattering the rebels. In his panic, Absalom spurred his mule to gallop as fast as possible away from the fighting, but the woods were thick and he wasn't paying attention. During his getaway, Absalom rides straight into a low-hanging branch, wedging his head firmly in it. Helpless and stuck dangling from a tree, Joab and his fighters finally catch up to him and hack Absalom apart like some human piñata. David reacts to Absalom's death unsurprisingly, falling to the ground, shaking and wailing in his grief. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you." Enough with the theatrics already. And Joab felt the same way and tears into him. "We saved your life today and the lives of your entire family, and this is how you behave? You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You've made it clear that your troops mean nothing to you, and that it would have been better if Absalom had lived and we had died. So get up and go speak to your men. Encourage them and speak kindly to them. For I swear to God that if you don't, not a single man will remain with you another day." David pulls himself together as best as he can, but it's clear he's a broken man. A deep depression washes over his mind and spirit as he becomes withdrawn and sullen. The daily business goes about as usual, although there is definitely a palpable unease in the air. Weakness in a king is dangerous, as all sorts of malcontents can take advantage of it. Like one such person named Sheba, who started traveling around the northern states of Israel to stir up discontent. He was convinced Israel should secede from the kingdom, but Judah remained firmly loyal to David. Well, we can't risk another civil war, and so Joab led the Philistine warriors after Sheba in the north, encountering no resistance whatsoever. In fact, the mere presence of the men was enough to squash any further rebellious thoughts. Eventually, they tracked Sheba to the walled city of Abel-Beth-Maachah, surrounding it for a long siege. What transpired next wouldn't be out of place in a Monty Python movie, because while Joab's troops prepared the battering ram, an elderly woman spoke from atop a parapet. "Hey, what are you doing? You know this is a great city you're destroying, right?" To which Joab responded, "I don't want to destroy anything, just give me Sheba and I'll leave." To which she responds, "Well, why didn't you say so? Hang on a sec." And a few moments later, the decapitated head of Sheba is tossed over the wall. All right then. Joab leaves, and that's the end of Sheba's rebellion. The latter part of David's reign is mostly uneventful. As an old man, he became very weak and suffered from terrible chills. His medical attendants decided that the best prescription was that a young virgin should lie next to him. You laugh, but that's also the remedy for chills on WebMD. Yeah, look it up. Well, they select a beautiful girl named Abishag, who's sort of kept his fire going, but just barely. He's not long for this world, and the next in line to the throne, his fourth son Adonijah, was getting really impatient with his father's insistence on staying alive. "Dad, hurry up!" Well, not having a patient bone in his body, Adonijah gets sick of waiting and proclaims himself King of Israel, even convincing Joab to back him. He holds a great ceremony and feast to commemorate this, and invites all the men of Judah and all of his brothers and sisters to attend. All except for his half-brother Solomon, the son of Bathsheba, the bathing exhibitionist. Naturally, she's outraged at this snub, and with the backing of the court prophet Nathan, who was also not invited to the party, she confronts the ailing David in his chambers. "My lord, you made a vow before God when you said to me, 'Solomon shall be king after me.' Well, behold, for Adonijah has made himself king, and you have done nothing about it. If you let this happen, he will treat Solomon and I as criminals." Nathan also agrees with this claim, casually mentioning that so do the high priests. So what say the king? Well, lying in his bed, held warm by Abishag, his personal electric blanket, David carefully chooses his words and speaks. As I swore to you by the Lord, Solomon shall be king after me, and he will sit in my throne. Take that, Adonijah! Bathsheba runs to tell Solomon the good news, at which he was placed on a mule and led to a holy spring where he's anointed king by Nathan and his priests. Afterwards, they had their own different kind of a ceremony, a kind of mobile party train, complete with singers, musicians, dancers, David's Philistine guards. There were so many people, in fact, that it said the very ground split apart under their noise. Sounds pretty loud, which is kind of the point. Solomon attracted numerous followers, curious as to what he was doing and where he was going. And where he was going was straight towards Adonijah's dinner soiree. At the sight of this impressive mob, the dinner guests dispense in fear, leaving King Adonijah to fend for himself. Afraid that he's about to be murdered, Adonijah grabs hold of the altar where the Ark of the Covenant had been brought out. If Solomon doesn't want to damage the Ark, then Adonijah needs a promise that he won't be harmed. Well, in a taste of the kind of king Solomon is going to be, he states, "If he is shown to be a worthy man, not a hair on his head shall fall to the earth. But if he is found to be wicked, then he dies." Adonijah cautiously lets go and flings himself at Solomon's feet, to which the new king simply replies, "Go home." Promise kept. Although Solomon couldn't dawdle, he needed to rush back to his father, whose health had taken a severe dip. Solomon arrives in the king's chamber to hear David's last wishes for his son. Obey the laws of Moses, right my wrongs, and be a just and wise king. Do these, and you will be successful in all you do. And around 970 BC, David, slayer of Goliath, unifier of Israel, God's chosen, died. A mixed record, to be sure. The Philistine and Canaanite threat are under control, but his own kingdom struggles to remain as one. Anytime there's an opening, it seems the north is ready to quit, leaving Judah to hold things together. Would Solomon have the strength to preserve the nation, or would he succumb to the same weaknesses that befell his dad, and even Saul? We've heard the stories about his wisdom, but was he really that wise? And what's the deal with those minds of his anyway, huh? Is that really a thing? Well, all that and more await as we explore the golden age of King Solomon, next time on the podcast History of Our World. For more information about the music of the ancient Hebrews featured in this episode, visit ancientlyre.com. My sincere thanks to Michael Levy for allowing his authentic music to be featured today. You can support his efforts to bring the sounds of the ancient world to modern audiences by purchasing his albums on iTunes, Amazon, or Bandcamp.